Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to this month's discussion video on September's chapters of Our Mutual Friend. This video is part of the Victorian-style serialised read-along I'm currently hosting of Our Mutual Friend. We are really quite near the end at this point, so it's a little bit too late if you haven't joined in. But hopefully after I have done this one there might be another one in the future, but more on that anon. We've just got a few months left of this, and in November we will finally be finished with the year-and-a-half long read-along of Our Mutual Friend. So in the month of September we read the following three chapters. Book the Fourth, Chapter 5, Concerning the Mendicant's Bride, Chapter 6, A Cry for Help, and Chapter 7, Better to be Abel than Cain. I hope you all enjoyed September's rather dramatic chapters. So firstly, let's discuss Chapter 5, Concerning the Mendicant's Bride, in which Bella Wilfer is slightly transformed into an angel in the house. Yeah. In this chapter we are shown the Wilfer family shortly after Bella has departed to marry Mr. Rokesmith. We're shown the uproar this causes at home and all of the many disagreements it causes. Bella has scandalously run away to marry a man that they don't know that much about without telling any of the family except her father, but no one else knows that because they have kept it a secret. Then throughout the rest of the chapter we get to see a lot more of Bella and John's marriage. Bella and John come to have dinner with the Wilfers, and then we get to see them in their own home, both when they are alone and also when Mr. Wilfer, Bella's father, comes to visit them. John and Bella seem for the most part to be very happy together, although John keeps on asking her if she would be happier if they were rich, referring perhaps to the fact that he is secretly John Harmon and secretly heir to a fortune, which he would now get because he's married her, and so therefore has fulfilled the condition of the will, even though she doesn't know who he is. In this chapter we also see a lot of Bella's growing domesticity, how she is slowly transitioning from Dickens's only heroine ever who could not cook, to someone who is very good at running a house, doing domestic chores, and making her home comfortable for her husband. So, points of interest in this chapter. Again, we see the divisions and the difficulties within the Wilfer family. I love how Dickens presents the problems of this family, because on the one hand it's really funny, it's hilarious and it's ridiculous, but also beneath that humour there's a lot of sadness because this is how this family live and they're all so unhappy, and they're all so often acting a part in order to elicit certain reactions from other people that they're all being completely deceitful with each other. Mr. Wilfer does not tell his wife nor his daughter that he actually went to Bella's marriage and already knew about it. Lavinia puts on an act of being hysterical in order to provoke a certain reaction from her mother. Dickens writes, "The young lady who, hysterically speaking, was only just come of age and had never gone off yet, here fell into a highly creditable crisis, which, regarded as a first performance, was very successful." This idea of it being a performance and of it being creditable, that it looks like it can be believed even though in fact it is only a performance. And this theme of acting and performance is one that is incredibly important throughout Our Mutual Friend. And again in this chapter we return to that key issue in Our Mutual Friend, that one of respectability. Lavinia says, "Bella has behaved in a most unsisterly way to me and might have severely compromised me with George and with George's family by making off and getting married in this very low and disreputable manner." And in a way Lavinia rather likes that her sister has been unrespectable, because it means she can reflect on her own respectability and how much superior she is to her elder sister Bella. But although Lavinia says this a bit spitefully, it does remind us how important reputation and respectability is in this book. Another interesting thing we see once again in this chapter is the relationship between Bella and her father being reversed, making Bella into a mother and Mr. Wilfer into a boy. "You are a very good little boy," said Bella, "to come unexpectedly and as soon as you could get out of school. And how have they used you in school today, my dear?" She calls him a grubby child and a bad boy. She ties a napkin under his chin before they eat and altogether makes a plaything of him. And this not only brings back the elements of Bella's playfulness, but also I think emphasises how problematic their family life has been and just how unhappy it has been, because one of the only ways in which they can have a happy relationship is by effectively switching the relationship they have to each other, because the family dynamics at home have always been so unhappy. At the moment Bella is away from her mother and sister and just with her father alone, they almost pretend to be slightly different people and adjust the circumstances, as though in doing that they could wipe away the rest of the family and have it just be the two of them in a different situation. The thing I find most interesting in this chapter, and which I do find in some ways problematic, is the presentation of Bella. Now Bella, on the one hand, is one of my favourite characters in all of Dickens. I think she is wonderful, I think she is hilarious, I think she is clever, and some of the speeches she makes in this book are some of my favourite in all of Dickens. I love the scene where she defends Mr. Rokesmith against Mr. Boffin. I absolutely love the scene where Mr. Rokesmith proposes and she refuses to be considered as a possession, and she is so infuriated by the fact that she has been left to someone in a will like a dozen spoons, as she says, and just how much this degradation of her as a person upsets her. And in that way I think she is a really significant and complex female character within Dickens, but I do find her transformation over the course of the book into much more of a domestic angel than she'd ever been before. A little bit troubling in some ways. On the one hand, you do see a great transformation in Bella over the course of the book, and I really, really like that. I like her moral transformation, and I like the way that she falls in love with John, and you can tell throughout this chapter that she is really, truly very, very fond of him. And yet it's very interesting, isn't it, and very telling in terms of Dickens' presentation of gender, that along with Bella's transformation into a moral woman, she also has to be transformed into a domestic woman, because domesticity and morality for women have to come hand in hand in Dickens' particular Victorian gender setup. Bella has changed before she marries John, but even after their marriage, she exerts herself to change for him. She says to her father, "You don't take milk, John does. I didn't before I was married, but now I do because John does." She changes her tastes and herself for John. She makes efforts to read all of the news while he's out so that she can talk about things which she thinks will interest him. And also she tries incredibly hard to become domestic. But John gone to business and Bella returned home. The dress would be laid aside, trim little wrappers and aprons would be substituted, and Bella, putting back her hair with both hands as if she were making the most businesslike arrangements for going dramatically distracted, would enter on the household affairs of the day. Such weighing and mixing and chopping and grating, such dusting and washing and polishing, such snipping and weeding and troweling and other gardening, such making and mending and folding and airing, such diverse arrangements, and above all such severe study. And she, being inspired by her affection and having a quick wit and a fine ready instinct, made amazing progress in her domestic efficiency. Over this chapter, Bella becomes more and more domestic, and in that way becomes more and more like the Dickensian female ideal, which in general, as I've spoken about before, is a kind of angel in the house figure, but much more complicated and definitely much more intelligent than that. Dickens's angels in the house, at least in his later novels, are people more like Esther Summerson or Lizzie Hexam. They are domestic and they are angelic, but they are also very intelligent and independent. And although it does at some points bother me that Bella becoming a moral woman means that she must also learn how to cook, at the same time I do think there are some elements of Bella's old character left in here. I like that she tells off the cooking book for being rubbish and stupid, and I also like one particular line that she says to Mr. Rotesmith: "I want to be something so much worthier than the doll in the doll's house." You know the Ibsen play A Doll's House, which came quite a long way after this? Apparently this is potentially where he got the title from this sentence in I Meet Your Friend. And I really love this line, and I think it's really interesting because it tells a lot about Bella and the fact that even though she has become domestic, even though she is sometimes patronised by the people around her, including at times her husband, who at one point calls her "my child," which I do find a bit weird, but he also calls her "my life" and "my soul," and in general many things that make me cringe a little bit. So let's just dismiss John Rokesmith's pet names as being in general a little bit rubbish. But Bella is aware, I think, how unserious she has been through a lot of her life, how she spends so much time play acting. With her father she play acts that he is his mother, and sometimes in her domestic tasks and in learning how to be, to her mind, a better wife and to keep a house, she at sometimes feels that she is play acting and she doesn't want to. She wants to be more than a doll that is controlled by other people. She wants to be more than a plaything, and she wants her home and her life to be more than a plaything. She talks in this chapter about feeling serious, and I think you can see a change in Bella that is far apart from domesticity, and is partly to do with her coming child, but is also partly to do with that feeling that she wants to be important and significant, that she doesn't want to be silly in the way that she has sometimes been. And that line is wonderful, and I think is one of the reasons why Bella Wilfer remains one of my favourite Dickensian characters, because her transformation over the course of the book is not simply from vain, capricious, mercenary girl to domesticated angel in the house. It is something much more complicated than that, and something much more believable and personal and unique than that, and that is why I think she is still a wonderful character. That is everything I have to say on that chapter. Now on to the next one, Chapter 6, A Cry for Help. This is rather a dramatic chapter, isn't it? In this chapter, Lizzie and Eugene meet. They have a long conversation in which they both, in a way, confess or at least imply their love for each other, but in which Lizzie tells Eugene that the only possibility for them is a life apart because they are so different in station, and that if he is a true gentleman, he should leave her alone and not pursue her, which will only be damaging to her reputation. Lizzie then starts to walk home, and as Eugene Rayburn is walking back, he knocks into someone and then is attacked by Bradley Headstone quite severely and thrown into a river. Quite a dramatic thing to occur. Lizzie hears the scream and runs back, and using all of the skills from her old life, she gets a boat and she rows into the river to rescue Eugene, to try and save his life, and she carries him to a place where he can get help, and we end the chapter not knowing whether Eugene will live or die. Quite dramatic, isn't it? So, points of interest in this chapter, which is one of my favourites in the book. I love the scene between Eugene and Lizzie here, because I think actually it is one of the few scenes in the book where we do do get to see them have a conversation alone, and in which we really get to see the truth of the relationships between them and the difficulty with which they both relate to each other, because they are in love with each other, but in such a complicated and messy way because of their different stations in life and because of the different lives that they have led, that Lizzie knows it is impossible, and Eugene kind of knows it is impossible but also really doesn't want to know that, and because he has more power and independence than her, he pursues her to this point in a way that, if known in the town, would be very damaging to her reputation. Earlier on in the book, Mortimer asked Eugene what his intentions are towards Lizzie and if he intends to seduce and abandon her, and if you think about just how many Victorian novels there are in which a gentleman seduces and abandons a young working class woman, this was a concern in the Victorian period, and certainly in the relationships between Lizzie and Eugene. Sexuality and a fear of the dangers of their attraction to each other is certainly something that hangs between them in this scene. Eugene keeps on trying to touch Lizzie, to put his arm around her waist, and she several times asks him to walk beside her and not touch her, and yet we do get to see the deep emotional connection between them in this scene and the deep love that they do bear each other, even in a complicated way. And I do think the writing and the dialogue here is wonderful. Eugene says, "I never thought before that there was woman in the world who could affect me so much by saying so little. Don't be hard in your construction of me. You don't know what my state of mind towards you is. You don't know how you haunt me and bewilder me. You don't know the cursed carelessness which is over-officious in helping me in every other turning of my life won't help me here. You have struck it dead, I think, and sometimes I almost wish you have struck me dead along with it." Lizzie says, "Think of me as belonging to another station and quite cut off from you in honour. Remember that I have no protector near me unless I have one in your noble heart. Respect my good name. If you feel towards me in one particular as you might if I was a lady, give me the full claims of a lady upon your generous behaviour. I am removed from you and your family by being a working girl. How true a gentleman to be as considerate of me as if I were removed by being a queen." And these speeches interest me so much, partly because they express all the emotion between them, but partly because Lizzie also shows just how proud she is of her situation and just how willing she is to ask for the respect that she deserves. He is cruel to her at some points in this scene. He makes her say things that she does not want to say, and he tries as much as possible to use the power he has over her, and yet she is also resolute and determined that they should have nothing more to do with each other, because she sees the damage to her reputation and also the complete uselessness of it. She says, "How can I think of you as being on equal terms with me?" Class is so important in this book and so important in the relations between them, and their parting is an interesting one because after Eugene has been trying to put his arm around her waist throughout the whole speech, at the end of it he held her almost as if she was sanctified to him by death and kissed her once, almost as he might have kissed the dead, which entirely desexualises that kiss but also shows just how hopeless it is, that effectively there is as little chance of them being together as though one of them were dead, which potentially might lead me on to the second half of this rather dramatic chapter. Firstly, I want to address the wonder of Dickens's writing when he describes Bradley's attack on Eugene, because I think it is brilliant. "He had sauntered far enough. Before turning to retrace his steps, he stopped upon the margin to look down at the reflected night. In an instant, with a dreadful crash, the reflected night turned crooked, flames shot jaggedly across the air, and the moon and stars came bursting from the sky. Was he struck by lightning? With some incoherent, half-formed thought to that effect, he turned under the blows that were blinding him and mashing his life, and closed with a murderer whom he caught by a red neckerchief, unless the raining down of his own blood gave it that hue." What astounding paragraphs are those! I love Dickens so much. His way with words is incredible. But more interesting by far to me, and why this chapter is one of my favourites, is what Lizzie does and how Lizzie acts. I've mentioned before in this read-along how the fact that Lizzie is physically strong is incredibly important in this book, partly because very few heroines in Dickens tend to be physically strong. Most of them are quite little and small and physically weak. After she's carried Eugene into the house, the doctor says, "You, my dear, you could not lift, far less carry this weight. I think I could not at another time, sir, but I am sure I did." Because of the work she has done in younger days, she is physically strong, but it's incredibly important here that she is very, very mentally strong as well. And this chapter, I think, is fascinating in terms of a gender reversal of the damsel in distress model, because Lizzie rescues Eugene from the point of death and brings him to doctors to try and save his life. She drags his near-dead body from the river. She acts with precision and certainty and intelligence in order to save this man's life. Listen to the way that Dickens describes her. "Her old bold life and habit instantly inspired her. Without vain waste of breath in crying for help where there was none to hear, she ran towards the spot from which the sounds had come." Then later, "Firm of look and firm of purpose. Once she let the body evade her, not being sure of its grasp. twice and she had seized it by its bloody hair. Twice Dickens repeats, desperately but not wildly, desperately but never wildly, and he talks about her main strength. The idea that it's her physical and mental strength that enables her to do this, to drag Eugene from the river and take him to help as soon as possible to give him the greatest chance of life. Basically, this is one of the most awesome things that a woman does in a Dickens novel, and it's one of the reasons why I love Lizzie Hexam so much, and it's one of the reasons why I love this book so much. But that is, I think, all I have to say on this chapter. Now to move on to chapter 7, Better to be Abel than Cain. After having got pretty close to murdering Eugene Wrayburn, Bradley Headstone goes back to the lock where Riderhood waits for him. He rests for a little while, shakes some blood on Riderhood's clothes, and then goes and bathes in the river. He changes into his schoolmaster respectable clothes and dumps the bloody bargeman's clothes, which so closely resembled Riderhood's, into the river, where Riderhood later fishes them out. And in the meantime, Bradley Headstone goes back to school. He goes back to his respectable day job, and when there, he is confronted by Charlie Hexam, who suspects him of the crime that he has heard of, and is horrified. Mostly not that Bradley Headstone would do something so immoral and harmful, but mostly that Bradley Headstone would do something so thoroughly unrespectable. And at the end of the chapter, after Charlie has been there, we see Bradley Headstone sink to the floor in complete despair. The most interesting thing, of course, in this chapter is the presentation of Bradley Headstone. I find the title of this chapter really interesting because, of course, what it implies is that at this moment it is worse to be Bradley Headstone than Eugene Wrayburn. I've mentioned before how Bradley Headstone is, in some ways, Dickens's best villain, but in other ways not a villain at all, and more of a tragic hero. Dickens does set him up throughout the book as this kind of tragic hero with this fatal flaw. He is referred to as the doomed Bradley, the miserable man, the wretched creature. He is tormented by remembering what he has done and thinking of how he might have done it better, because he is aware that Eugene is still lingering between life and death, that the man has not died, and he is terrified. And we see his despair at the end of the chapter. He drooped his devoted head when the boy was gone, and shrank together on the floor, and grovelled there with the palms of his hands tight clasping his hot temples in unutterable misery and unrelieved by a single tear. I want to show you this illustration in case you don't have illustrations in your copy. This is one of my favourite illustrations in any Dickens book because I think it so thoroughly depicts utter despair on the part of Bradley Headstone, and also the juxtaposition between his despair and his previously respectable life by the top hat sitting on the table. And talking of respectability, Charlie Hexam is really, really interesting in this chapter. I'm going to put your selfishness before you, Mr. Headstone, your passionate, violent and ungovernable selfishness, to show you why I can and why I will have nothing more to do with you. Ironic, isn't it? Because actually one of Charlie's biggest worries here is his own selfish worry that what's happened to Eugene Wrayburn might lay him open to suspicion. How do you know that, pursuing the ends of your own violent temper, you have not laid me open to suspicion? Not content with doing what I have put before you, you will drag my name into notoriety through dragging my sisters, and the worse you will prove to be, the harder it will be for me to detach myself from being associated with you in people's minds. I have made up my mind that I will become respectable in the scale of society, and that I will not be dragged down by others. I have done with my sister as well as you. In conclusion, if you feel a sense of having injured me and a desire to make small reparation, I hope you will think how respectable you might have been yourself and will contemplate your blighted existence. Pretty harsh words, but then Bradley has just tried to kill a man. But of course it's very important here that what Charlie focuses on is respectability. What he finds abhorrent about Bradley's crime is not that Bradley Headstone has attacked a man, it's not that he has tried to kill another human being, it is that he has done something so unrespectable. He says, I have done with my sister as well as with you, as though Lizzie's behaviour is as bad as Bradley's because it has also not been entirely respectable. And it is this, in a way, which breaks Bradley too, and after having been fairly respectable since the crime in his outward appearance, having gone on being a teacher, going to class, keeping everything tight inside his head and acting in a measured way, it's the knowledge that his respectability is gone forever. And when spoken by Charlie, who is now respectable, who is what Bradley Headstone has worked all his life to be, it's this that makes Bradley Headstone break down and lie on the floor in complete anguish. So quite a dramatic 3 chapters in the month of September. I hope you have all enjoyed September's chapters of Our Mutual Friend. In October we will be reading the following 4 chapters. Book 4, Chapter 8, A Few Grains of Pepper, a very good chapter. Chapter 9, 2 Places Are Vacated. Chapter 10, The Doll's Dressmaker Discovers a Word. And Chapter 11, Effect is Given to the Doll's Dressmaker's Discovery. October's chapters are going to be good. And November's chapters, the final chapters in the Our Mutual Friend read-along, will also be very good as well. I can't believe we're nearing the end. I'm so excited. I love this book so much. I hope you're all continuing to enjoy Our Mutual Friend. Please let me know down in the comments how you're getting on and what you thought of these few chapters, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.